So welcome again to the 76. We're here to kind of continue our push forward on solving all of the United States problems and make sure that we start allocating capital and spending the taxpayer dollars more appropriately than we do today. Maybe even someday balancing the budget, for God's sake, and appreciating the deficit and the gigantic hole that we've created for our country and that's a big part of what we're, the bigger effort here, which is to find agreement amongst the population and get us back on track with really a constitutional republic where we do have representatives that represent our wants and needs and true areas of agreement in building our society. I mean, I think that's Mike. If you want to kind of jump in, I mean, that really is the purpose for my.
I was thinking, like, I was kicking around this idea that in terms of when a lot of these executive orders have kind of made me thinking about this, and when we should make a law and when we should when a law should not be made and at what level a law should be made, and just as a very general statement that if you can't get a consensus, and what a consensus is it 51%? Is it 2/3? Is it 3/4? But without a consensus, if you can't reach a consensus, then I think at a particular level, then you just there shouldn't be a law about it. And I think that results in either one of two things, either fewer laws or more compromise. And if at one particular level there can't be consensus, then you go down to a more local level. And I think most people would agree that they would prefer, and now I think if there is going to be a rule that's affecting their lives, that it's made at a more local level than a more centralized level. I think most people would prefer that. Like, if there's going to be some law that's going to affect me, I'd rather it be at a more local level. Now, both sides of the political spectrum seem to want things to be implemented at the federal level when it's something they believe in. But on the local level, if the current federal law is something that goes against what they believe in. But I think we need to have a framework that you realize that there are going to be laws passed that you're not going to like or agree with, but that's just the nature of democracy, because there's going to be compromise, and so if you can't,
and it also allows free movement among the states, which was one of the founding principles of the
that's right. That's right. That if you're
local laws, you can move.
Yeah.
So
if the whole every
like the idea. Sure.
Yeah. If you can get 2/3, let's say it's 2/3. I think 2/3 people would agree. If you get two out of three people agreeing on something, you have a consensus. So for the sake of argument, let's say it's 2/3. So if you can get 2/3 of the representatives in the country to agree on a specific law, then I think that number is in terms of passing an amendment to the Constitution. I think it's something like 2/3 of the states need to pass it for it to become. And there's other parts of it too, but that idea that if we are going to have a national law, that there should be a consensus at the national level. And if you can't get that consensus at the national level, then then okay, I'm okay with states, even though some states are going to pass. I think this goes to this other micro agreement that I want to propose. That
before we get there, let's back up a little bit, because I think we're long past those are kind of founding principles, and I think we'll get back there. But initially, we need to analyze kind of where we are, which is, I don't know that we can really rely on any of these representatives, any of these senators, any of the lobbyists, and the gigantic permanent Washington that's in existence, or even the whoever happens to be the current administration at the time. I happen to be a big proponent of the current administration. I will be critical of this administration when it's warranted. But what I like about what they're doing is they're attempting to shake up the status quo, which is comfortable. And you and I have discussed status quo and related to voting and how we want it. We all vote on our personal interests, at least to some degree. Some people are entirely personal interests. Some people don't vote at all. But right now, we need to analyze kind of the current system. Is the status quo worth defending? Because I don't think it is.
I would
I
say,
don't think it is at all. I don't think the representatives are represented. I don't think they represent their constituency whatsoever at the federal level. I don't think they're particularly smart. I would like to see a Wonderlic. I'm disappointed the Wonderlic, is suddenly no longer a part of the NFL. We didn't have any discussion about it. I thought it was my favorite part of the draft, knowing what those Wonderlic scores were. I think we should have that for our representatives. And I will point out, Hank Johnson, I'm going to be highlighting you soon enough, and I don't think you'd score very well. Let's just say that. And I don't think a lot of the representatives and senators would score very well.
No, I think
representatives, they're going to have a much lower score than the senators. But we need to look at the structure as it exists today, the people that exist today, the system, the bureaucracy, the swamp, however we look at it, that exists today, and really start peeling it back and think, do we need to take a different approach?
I think I would agree. We definitely need a different approach. And I think, the Trump administration is a departure from the establishment, and I'll say, and then I include in there both Democratic and Republican, kind of traditional Republican and Democratic, that has not worked, or it's stopped working. And I think there's a number of reasons, for that. I can't say that I'm a fan of the current administration. I'm optimistic that perhaps some good things will come of it. And maybe this is just a part of the evolution of this country and I understand why people are have why the majority of people who voted in the last election did vote for Trump out of frustration with the establishment parties. I totally get that. I don't think the Trump methodology is going to is a long-term viable way to run a democracy. But we can get in. I think the reason why
constitutional republic,
but it's a democracy. We have democratic institutions. We utilize part of it. I think is how we've implemented democracy, in that when you have a winner take all, most elections, there are a few exceptions in this country, are winner take all elections, and what that leads to is where you have to separate yourself from, you have to create distance between yourself and the other party, and it leads to these kind of more radical extreme views, as opposed to coming together to the center and compromising. And so if some party or group gets 10% of the vote, then they should get 10% of the representation. If another vote, it's 30%, they get 30% of the representation. If some group gets 60% of the vote, they should get 60% of the representation, because what that leads to is more precision in representing different people's beliefs. It gives you, and I think ultimately what it leads to is definitely more political parties, but then for a political party to actually establish a government, and this is what they have like in the UK and Europe, you have to actually form coalitions, which leads to compromise, but people are still more voices are being heard. When you just have
fair enough. We can get into maybe a more perfect system, or even just a better system. But we're really far away from that. I mean, we have to operate with what we have today, and what we have today is an absolutely broken federal government that is rampant with corruption and bribery and self-interest at the elected official level. And not just the federal government, but state governments and municipal governments and county governments and probably even school boards are taking bribes. I mean, you hear of football coaches engaging in inappropriate relationships so that certain players get playing time on teams. That's unfortunately not an uncommon thing. So I think those are all great topics, and we're gonna, as we have in many of our discussions so far, we get off track pretty quickly.
But I think let's bring it back
because it's so giant. It's so, these issues are so far reaching. They the integration with different departments and different issues and different topics is it's a gigantic mess. It's a gigantic and convoluted mess. So it's hard to kind of decipher, and that is part of the problem. The powers that be want us to continue to find it difficult to navigate and figure it all out. So that's what we're trying to unwind here, and I think the Department of Education is a great place to start.
Sure, we can start there. Yeah, just one thing I wanted is with just talking about the current government with two parties. People talk about gridlock being a negative thing, and like in terms of making progress or making change, it can be, but and I think the reason we're seeing so many, like all presidents, with over, I think the number, if you chart the number of executive orders over the past 40 years, there's just been a continual increase. And I think executive orders started as just a way to provide a little more detail on particular rules, like that regarding legislation that was passed, as opposed to really being, acting as legislation that really should have been passed, in Congress. And what prevented that was, just norms. So nothing written down in the Constitution or in the law saying the president, no, I don't think it's ever clearly defined what, an executive order, can or can't be. And I think Trump is, testing.
He's testing it for sure, and then the judiciary is getting involved as well. And really, it comes down to it's a question between where the powers start and stop within each of the three branches. And I think there's a fair amount of at least a question as to how much gray area there is between the three, or maybe to quote our favorite losing candidate, Kamala Harris, she loves those Venn diagrams. So where does the Venn diagram of those three branches overlap? And it could overlap between only two. It could overlap between all three of them. She loves those Venn diagrams.
Well, it is an experiment, but let's get to the topic of education. I think education is a great topic to explore the role of local, state and federal government, like what their role each are.
I mean, I think it's there's a lot of departments that have been added since the original four, and this is one of them, added in 1979 under Jimmy Carter. But these are some of the stated purposes: distributes federal education funding, grants and loans for poor and disabled and other underprivileged segments, enforces federal education laws. Okay, I'm not sure what those federal education laws are, but the Department of Education is to enforce. I guess clearly it has to do with attendance and requirement to send children to school. And I guess you think about it a little bit, we can probably get there for what that is. Collects and analyzes education data, supports education research, administers student aid, and then promotes equal access and educational excellence. You and I were talking beforehand a little bit about, maybe what the genesis of this was, and I want to give you an opportunity to talk about that. But first, this is the current budget's about $270 billion. 2/3 of it is mandatory. 1/3 is discretionary. I don't really know what the distinction is between the two, other than the obvious. And it brings me. It makes me think of the slush fund nature that our federal government has, which is something that we should that should be a micro agreement. That should be, and to remind the audience, micro agreements are, the foundational building blocks for kind of bringing our population, all the citizenry back onto the same page with what it is that we do in fact agree upon. We're looking for 76% agreement on major issues that it takes to make up a society. And I think we have that agreement. I think once we debate these topics, once we go through these issues, I think it will become really apparent that we're really not all that different. Conservatives and liberals, Democrats and Republicans, and it really is just the effort of the federal government, all the players, the complicit media, the complicit corporations, certainly at the leadership level, to keep us at each other's throats so that there can be nefarious activities, slush fund, usage and other ways to kind of move money around and line people's pockets that shouldn't be receiving anything, and it has to do with political favor and power and all of that stuff. So that 76% agreement is again, where I think we will end up residing, and I think we'll have agreement on a lot of these. I don't think it's going to be that challenging, certainly at the micro agreement level, but education is important. All children should be able to receive the same education. For the public school system, there's private school, it's a different thing. Maybe there's hybrid model there as well with the charter schools. But I'm just talking about the public school system, which the Department of Education is largely focused on. It's a $270 billion budget. About 7% is administrative. That's probably, kind of a big number.
7%. I don't know. With charities, and like if you look at charities, if they keep their overhead under 10%, and 90% goes to the mission, I think that's not over. In terms of overhead, I would not say that's egregious. But I think
I thought it was going to be like I thought it would be a lot higher, and it's probably not reported accurately. It's again, there's a lot to dive into, and we won't get to all of it. But let's.
Yeah. Well, I'd say with any like things that just naturally I'm suspicious about, or things that I think there's opportunity for efficiency improvement, is when the states send in money to the federal government, and then the money comes back to the states to do, like something like the military is something. Well, that kind of makes sense. You can't send the money to this, like the federal government actually has to use that money to kind of organize a cohesive military. But schools are something that are really very local. Elementary schools, high schools, super local. Community colleges are local. State universities are local at the state level. So sending all the money off to the government to have the government repartition it back out is for things where it doesn't need to be, is ineffective or inefficient. And so I think starting there, I'm very much, I think really all education, really the focus should be like starts at home. And the number one people responsible for a child's education are their parents and their family. That's the number one. So if education in a country or in a state or is failing, it's the number one people responsible for that failure are the parents or the family, however that family is structured. That's number one.
It's a great point. Doesn't that support the elimination of the Department of Education at the federal level?
Well, I think so my short answer is I think there's many, well-intentioned things that it attempts to do, but ultimately these things can be done by other entities. It could be just this, it could just be the state government that does it. Like states can determine how they want to fund their education. They collect it from their businesses, from their citizens, and they do it locally. And I'm sure that states will, make decisions in terms of their educational policy and stuff that I don't agree with. And if I don't, agree with them, really, like if it's my state that's making these, well, then I would have to have a decision. Can I live with this, or do I have to move to another state? And I know there's people out there, that think, well, that's really unfair, but some people can't move or they're too poor to move. But that's a different issue than where education decisions should be made.
So why was the department founded?
Well, I believe it's not a direct. I was under the impression, but I just did some reading, just briefly, that I always thought it was and I believe this is still one of the major motivations, like the Brown versus Board of Education decision in '54, which said that you can't have segregated schools, provided ultimately, though not directly, because I think one of the department's, early missions was, that achieving a quality of education across public schools, and helping schools that had historically, uh, you know, uh, had issues in poor areas and largely minority areas where they were seen as the legacy of prejudicial policies and racist policies had led to areas that where schools were doing poorly, and they needed they needed a boost, they needed additional help, they needed to make sure that these students were getting a fair shake, which is all very well intended. And by all means, like people who grew up in areas in the South, they suffered from lack of opportunity and lack of education. Now, we have the civil rights laws, and so there was a Supreme Court case I got to look that recently that I think it was. I have to go back and I'm not going to talk about this now, because I should go back and find the actual case where it had to do with
broad strokes. I think we'll be able to kind of paint a picture and get to a lot of times. So I maybe just step back and I'll let you get back on track. I think it's important the way that I look at the federal government and state governments. I really think that it's important to look at them as if they were a company, or even an individual. An individual making decisions. The purpose of the department, and this is 45 years ago, was established to set up to accomplish a number of things. Okay, maybe the prevention of discrimination, providing opportunity for all the children in the country. A lot of other noble efforts that were important at the time. And maybe still today, I don't know. I don't think as much, but I don't know all the school districts. And again, we get to local levels, and maybe that's the enforcement of laws, no discrimination and so forth. But were those goals identified, and have they been measured against over the years, and have and is the purpose of that department now gone? And especially in light of, as we look at some of the this is not going to surprise anybody. I mean, we're all very well aware of the decline in the educational outcomes in this country relative. Our global standing has declined from very high, number one, in a lot of areas. I think in the late 70s we weren't quite up there with Japan and maybe even Korea in terms of science and technology. You probably would know better, but we weren't as far behind as we are today. Some of these the OECD findings, we're right in the middle of the pack, and there's just absolutely no reason for that kind of decline, especially when we have a Department of Education that presumably one of those key factors was to promote continued or even increasing excellence in education. Let's lift everybody up, and a lot of times it feels like we push down the top to get an equal outcome.
Well, I think measuring achievement in education and benchmarking, I think it's a difficult task, and to separate out what's working from not working. I would, once again, I would defer to, local decision making, like this triangle between principal and parents and teacher, because where parents elect the school board, who hires the teacher or who hires the principal, who then ultimately makes hiring decisions about teachers. And I've had this conversation with lots of people in my family. I've been a teacher for brief periods of time, but a lot of my family have taught for decades. My mom was a teacher for several decades. Her sister was a teacher for several decades. My grandfather was a superintendent. My grandmother, she was a school teacher. So, but when you talk about how you evaluate, or like, how do you evaluate who's a good teacher and who's a good teacher, who's a bad teacher? And like, well, and it's because some teacher, like, you can't do it on just test scores, or like, because, some teacher might be very good, but her kids aren't as talented or academically inclined as another, or you can't, or you have teachers teaching to the test. But the thing is, so principals should know, just like
could very easily, and I think the private sector does. I mean, we could look to private schools and understand how they evaluate their teaching talent. One thing that's not in place is a teachers union, and we can get into that and what has been their role in the demise of our educational system, protecting teachers that don't deserve to have jobs.
I do. Yeah, I'm not opposed.
There are ways, Kuba, we can get to a metric. You and I could figure it out on this show, what the metrics are and how we evaluate a good and a bad teacher.
But the thing is, I agree that if you're a principal, you'll have your own methodology. Each principal can have their own methodology. So there doesn't have to be a uniform methodology. Like, this is the way you evaluate, this is the equation you use, or how many questions, whatever the principal comes up with. If you're a principal, you better be able to evaluate who's a good teacher and who's not a good teacher. And if you can't, then the school board, the parents should say, hey, Johnny, goes to your school. And if enough parents are dissatisfied with the principal's ability to make these decisions, then they'll lose their job. Just like in the private sector, like, there's a lot of jobs out there where it's a qualitative, quantitative mix of evaluating, but people make those decisions. It's the principal's job to figure it out. And if different principals figure it out in different ways, if they want to write books about it or, have conferences about it, that's fine. But you can figure out a way to, and the parents will tell you, but just from, hey, Johnny couldn't read at the beginning of the year. Johnny can read now. Johnny was, an idiot at the beginning of the year. Johnny's a genius now. Principals, surveys, whatever methodology they want to use to fill out their roster of teachers. And of course, some parents are going to be disappointed with this teacher, but that principal realizes that every teacher is going to have at least a few parents that they don't get along with, but that's
fair enough. I mean, but we're getting into the weeds on this stuff. I mean, we have reading scores that are abysmal. But I don't care. Abysmal. But nobody's doing a good job in these public schools. Nobody.
But I think ultimately it's like reading score should not matter, math score, whatever the principal wants to use to determine
reading score should not matter.
No, they should, because how important is reading? How compared to programming or this or handwriting or math or let's rank them. How would you rank them? I could come up with a ranking for the importance of the subject matter in just a few seconds. I think I would say reading, writing, and math are still kind of top of the list. I think if you can read, science and technology. If you can read, you can pretty much learn anything.
Yes.
So you can learn math, you can learn science if you can read, and if you can write, well, that's kind of goes hand in hand. It's a separate skill, but if you read enough, your writing is going to probably, there's a strong correlation between the amount someone reads and how well they write. But yeah, those are the three things that the school should definitely focus on. And if you want to leverage,
how preposterous is the situation that we're in the public school system?
Well, kids come in
where we are.
Kids come in at all different levels and to try, so, but that's why I mean, it begins with the parents. Parents
starting at kindergarten. I mean, when, some kids have reading at home, and that's fine. They have a little bit of an advantage.
But
we should be able to overcome that. There's a lot of nap time, there's cookie time,
Yeah. I mean, most of the reading
and social equity time.
I think. Well, all right. Let me just say my opinion, and this is the way I kind of viewed it with my kids, and they get relatively, I think, decent public school educations. But as a parent, you kind of view it as state subsidized daycare. But if my kid wasn't getting what I thought he needed, then I was going to supplement that at home or go in and and they were both. I was fortunate. Both kids, they liked going to school fairly well, and they were kind of self-motivated. So I didn't really have to do that much. But I realized a lot of kids aren't. And a lot of kids, you it's getting them out of bed in the morning and go to school, and then having them complete assignments and things is, is not always easy, but it's ultimately the parents' responsibility. You brought them into this world. They're your responsibility. And so you need to figure out, what they need in terms of education, but you can't, parents, they have this idea. They're just going to dump the kid off at the school, and the kid's going to go there for 8 hours a day for 12 years. And they're going to come out an educated person, which is ridiculous.
I don't think it's ridiculous. I don't think it's ridiculous at all. I think there's a contract. I think you run the math on these numbers, and it's about $20,000 per student that we're spending, and it's going to the school. So could you and I put together a school system for 100 students, and let's just say a couple of grades? At 20 grades, so 100 students, $20,000 per student. Was that $2 million? That's our budget. Maybe we can raise some more. Probably could, but let's stick with that. Could we put together a pretty good curriculum to get kids to be able, let's say kindergarten, first and second grade, could we have those kids reading and understanding appropriate or advanced math for that grade level, reading more advanced, and writing, and understanding language, and getting into some social studies and some science and technology? I think without question. So we don't need to be stuck on the current status quo. The status quo is the problem in this country. That's the problem.
Well, I think really, the thing that I'll say it, but really, people talk about teachers being underpaid and people not enough money going to education, and the bottom line really is that until businesses aren't able to hire the employees that they need to make money, as long as they're able to get enough people to do the jobs they need done at the level of education that they need to do those jobs, short of that, no one's going to put more money into education or more than they absolutely positively have to, because really it suffices. Yeah, reading scores could be higher, math scores could be higher, but you could have, everybody could be acing the SAT, but the world still needs ditch diggers too, and it needs people who knows how to do various things that have nothing to do with these skills. Yeah, it would be better if people were smarter and had more skills, but it really, the realistic thing is, regardless of where the test scores are compared to everyone else in the world, what matters to our country really is our ability to employ people to do certain jobs. Now, part of our educational failing means that a lot of these, a lot of really good jobs are being done by people who come here from China and India and other countries where they've had a more rigorous education and they're better equipped, or perhaps more motivated to take on some of these tougher academic challenges, these fields requiring tougher academics.
It's a failure of our system, first and foremost. If we have a good system and then students choose, or their parents fail them, or whatever is the case, because that will happen. Not all parents are the same, obviously. And we can't protect everybody, and not everybody can win in a society. It's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. But the system is currently the failure in this country. The system is what has driven our global scores down and allowed those Indians and those Chinese to take over those jobs, or do whatever it is that you're. I'd
say it's more. Sure. The overall, I won't say our education. I think our education system is providing what society demands it provides, and that bar is not very high. In terms of what it required for someone to get through high school, in terms of what it required for someone to do to get through college, I think the bar of what what we produce, our education system produced what our country requires it to produce. Say if you were to shut off, say, no more engineers, could take jobs in the United States that weren't born and educated here, then the education system becomes like a real problem, because all of a sudden we've got a lot of job openings that aren't being filled because there's people who aren't educated. Now what I think would happen is companies those salaries would go up, and more people would go and study them and put in the work to do those more difficult technical jobs that requires more education. So I think it's a supply and demand thing that our system doesn't.
I understand what you're saying, Mike, but if we don't provide the basics, we never get to the rest of it. And the basics are writing and reading and math and science and social studies if there's time. There's obviously some importance to understanding different aspects of societies and different cultures and all of the components of a social studies curriculum. But where we've gone in this country, and you hear it, I was listening to Randy Weingarten speak at some Mayor Tinkin's memorial conference about leadership and leadership and public policy. And really, she's been the president of the it's actually not the biggest. I thought it was the biggest national teachers union, the American Federation of Teachers. It's the second largest. It's just that she happens to be more prominent. She's out there, speaking and promoting, and it was an anti-Trump rally really at the end of the day. And it talks about, being out there on the front line for communities and for children and all the buzzwords. And when you start looking for these things and you look for the failures of our federal government, it's everywhere. When you start looking, you see it everywhere. There's no reason why this woman, who makes, by the way, $500,000 a year, and she's been doing it for 17 years, has not an ounce of shame as to what she and as a large component of the education system has produced. Not an ounce of shame in this woman. Has no problem taking down $500,000 a year and talking about how she's helping communities and children. She was talking about how important it was to distribute. I thought she said 10 million books. Later, she referred to it as 1 million books in a year, as being like some big accomplishment. This is where I thought your expertise on Estonia would come in handy, because who the hell cares about handing out books? All the books are right here. We have access to them. It's not, you don't need to be handing out books. And does everybody have access to a laptop, a cell phone? Well, not everybody, but it kind of seems like we're at a tipping point where we certainly do. So the current, again, back to the status quo, the status quo is irreparably broken.
Yeah, and I would agree. The status
thinking to change it.
I would agree that you're going to see no significant improvement in the education prospect. Like doing what we've been doing in education for the last 50, 60 years, is, I'm going back to when we started school, like doing the things that we currently do there's not going to be any improvement. You're not going to, so and I think teachers unions are, part of that. I'm not against unions. I'm not against teachers. I think there's a lot of teachers I've known. Been fortunate to have a lot of good teachers. And I think they would have done better if, they could have competed for higher salaries based on their ability to teach, as opposed to it being based on, like, there's plenty of teachers out there that have been teaching for 3 or 4 years that are way better teachers than teachers that have been teaching for 35 years. I would probably argue that most teachers that have been teaching for 3 or 4 years are probably better than the ones who are still teaching it.
I would say so. And what other industry? We should take a look at the industries where, that's the inverse relationship. That's an inverse relationship relative to other industries. Like, you should gain more experience and wisdom and efficiency and effectiveness.
And get paid for it. But if you just get, if you just kind of plateau after you've got tenure, and then you just get gradual increment, like just based largely on your ability to not molest kids or like run a meth lab out of your classroom, which seems about what you need to do to actually lose a teaching job. That, there was that Waiting for Superman movie. Like they talk about the number of, in the state of Illinois, the number of doctors that lose their license each year, the number of lawyers that get disbarred each year, compared to the number of teachers who actually lose their. And it's ridiculous. Like Department of Education is one area of that. I agree that, I have no problem with it. Those responsibilities going back to the states and the states figuring it out, and the federal government. Also, I think a really detrimental thing is that as the government has subsidized and made federal loans more available to students, the main effect of that has been the price of college has gone up, with that. I took out some federal loans, and at the time I was appreciative of them, and I, was able to pay them off relatively quickly, but that was before that the price of colleges even skyrocketed even further, because they made more loans available. Now, like, there's kids who shouldn't be like making decisions. 18-year-olds should not be making decisions about like taking out hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans, especially for some of the degrees they're getting at some of the schools they're coming from, because you have no idea about how interest compounds and what a $150 payment, kids, they're like, oh yeah, I'd like to go to this school in this other state. No, I'll just take out loans and I'll pay it back when I've got my job making $250K a year as a social influencer. Then that like the kids just make so in terms of like the federal government basically creating this, like allowing colleges to just jack up their rates and, build climbing walls. And, when we were to school, college was kind of like, a divey place, which was appropriate for the people and the type of people we were. It was divey, but now it's really kind of posh and nice, and they got all these amenities. Of course, the tuition is like, just ridiculous.
I couldn't believe that my tuition included a racquetball court across the street and some free weights. Like I was like blown away by that. Now it's like, the entitlement, the rooms these days are they're posh living quarters. I do think there's something to talk about, because I disagree on especially after learning that you were a teacher. I don't think that teachers deserve the credit that they demand that we give them all the time.
It was a charter school.
I don't think they're underpaid. How about that? I don't think the adjustment is the larger adjustments. Number one, the fact that they have the entire summer off. Like what other industry has that? So make the adjustment in compensation there, and holidays, and it seems like an increasing number of days off, like relative to when we were kids, like the number of teacher days that they have, whatever those are, in-service days, whatever those are. You have to make the adjustment for how much they actually work, which is not much.
They do have a sweet.
Not to mention the pension that they get. What's the value of that? And not to mention probably the biggest benefit of all, or adjustment of all, is the inability to get fired for doing a shitty job.
Well, yeah. So maybe the average is right. I'm sure there's teachers out there, if their salary was based in an actual where they can negotiate and compete for the best jobs, that they would be making what they're worth. And I suspect, and the ones who like, well, you're kind of a shitty teacher, you're gonna like get paid this, they'd quit and leave the profession.
Back to kind of looking at it as if it were a company being run. I mean, there needs to be accountability, and there's not any accountability.
No, and I think
especially when the unions get involved, we need to dig in on these unions. They're really problematic organizations that are a massive part of the problem. Massive part of the problem.
Yeah.
Illinois, your backyard is exactly that's a perfect breeding ground for unimpressive educators.
Yeah. I think technology ultimately will be the ultimate that unwinds this mess, because like you can go online and take free classes at the best universities in the world, and there's so much information available on that phone or on your laptop. and like with the AI tools, I just finished taking a class in, in quantum computing, and it was all online, and there was amazing resources and videos and things all
I mean,
available.
look at Khan Academy. Khan Academy is
Yeah.
if you just kept a child home and required them to go through the entire curriculum on Khan Academy, they would be a far superior student to one who, probably by the equivalent of 6th or 7th grade, then certainly the average. It's embarrassing to even talk about the average high school education anymore. It's so abysmal. The resources are there. That's why this idiot talking about Randy Weingarten, talking about all the books she distributed. What is she? What decade is she living? What millennium is she living in? It's absolutely preposterous. So,
well, I think we can agree. Like people, I think if the some of the roles and responsibilities went back to the states, I think we'll see. I think that having that at the local level, so people, if they want it all to go to gym teachers, if they want it to go to art, they want to have gymming.
Whatever they want to do. I don't disagree. And
if they want to have PE heavy, if they want to have art heavy, if they want to have music as a whatever, sure. I think it should be like, and parents, because I think kids ultimately, if I had a school,
reading and math and writing has to be central to all of it.
Well, I think you could have
that's where, and I don't know that the feds need to do it, but at the state level, like we're failing our children, and parents, unfortunately, all parents are not created equal. They will allow their children to fail, and so there does need to be some.
I think,
oversight.
But parents, like, if you want,
sexual orientation, just to be clear, does not need to be that's not not amongst math and reading and writing.
In terms of the curriculum, all these things about the curriculum and what books, I think let the librarian choose. And if the parents don't like the books the librarian chooses, then that's a conversation between the parents and the librarian and the principal, and that's a local decision of what books, and parents can always. But like,
that becomes a complex. Like there should be some ground rules for, as long as there's transparency and the parents pay attention, and the school boards, because we've seen plenty of videos of these school boards just sitting there, cutting people off, taking people out who are complaining. It's a broken system. That's part of the broken system. Even at the local level, it's broken.
I mean, if you're going to have kids read, unless it's going to be like Spot and Jane, see Dick. Dick the boy, not Dick the man.
I don't remember that book.
See Jane, see Dick, see Jane. But like, if you're going to have any type of literature, you're going to have controversy. Basically, if you have the Bible in your library, which I like, the Bible is a historical book, it should be in the library. But people
in the library and part of the curriculum are two different things. But let's jump into the. I want to jump.
I think a school should focus definitely on reading, math, and writing. And I think you could that's what the schools really should focus on. And parents, you don't have to be a genius or have a PhD to know if your kid can read, or evaluate, is your kid reading better or worse than they were when they started. So I think the main thing is with education is, and I think what's his name, he's the fella who was in the presidential race. I can't remember.
Republican or Democrat or
Republican. What's his name? I can't believe. I really.
Is he a senator?
No. He's a tech guy. He's the Indian guy.
Vivek Ramaswamy.
Vivek. Yeah. I think he's a very intelligent guy.
And he's on those for a while, and then isn't he running for governor of
Ohio? Yeah. He's I have my issues with him, but I think one of the things he got right was, and he pointed out that our priorities, what our culture prioritizes, is not a culture that prioritizes like the things that it should be prioritizing for a society that really cares about education. In terms of we still have we celebrate. He said, I had a quote about celebrating football and the prom queen over the math team and academics. And I think, it's not politically savvy to put it,
it's
but
fair, but those
right.
are teenage dynamics, and there's
But,
those that's
but that would
different from.
change. No, but like your teenagers are paying attention to what their parents pay attention to, and what the larger societies pay attention, and who's getting paid. And we, as a society, as an American society, we, we do not embrace.
We adore celebrities. We adore athletes. A lot of these people are not worthy of adoration. 100%.
But
we adore senators. We have tens of thousands of people who are just enamored by a senator because of the size of their bank account or their influence and power. Representatives as well, state and local. I mean, even county commissioners. And I agree. I mean, it's all the same thing. It's kind of it's a problem. We choose to hold up the wrong people in my mind. And we allow them to talk about how they're public servants, like they're doing us a favor that they stay in Congress for 30 years and turn their decent salary into tens of millions of dollars magically. There's a lot of problems with how we operate as a society, and I think we talked about before, like the Chinese. I'm obviously no fan of the Communist Party. But they made the right move in limiting the internet.
It sounds like you're a little bit a fan of the Communist Party.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it wouldn't fly here. Our chief executive is using tariffs in a lot of different ways, but people start complaining about how the shelves are going to be empty on Christmas. We're kind of weak in a lot of areas, and a lot of this weakness, I think, is directly related to our failures in education.
I'd say the Chinese are picking up on, because I think in many ways that Chinese have a stronger culture in terms of education and an appreciation for it and I think so if we want to have individual freedoms in this country, I think one of the individual freedoms that you're not going to put this in an amendment or anything, but is the ability to fuck up your kids and do a disservice to your kids and raise your kids poorly, because a lot of people do, and a lot of people will. But just as our culture, should say, listen, if your kid is fucked up, it's on you. You are the number one reason that your kid, and some kids have genetic.
Yeah, but then they walk away and they go into the social they go into the orphanage system, and I don't think there has to be some oversight.
The culture,
your point is taken. We demand our freedoms, and it's not a perfect system. So there is individual accountability, and if you're a parent, you have responsibility, and sometimes unfortunately, very often parents don't take those responsibilities seriously or even at all. So,
and I think
and by the way, the pursuit of the perfect is often, I'm sure some poet said it better, but it's often, the enemy of the great or the good.
Yeah.
And it's also a political tactic to, stand up, you're not a perfect person. And I think it's absolutely what's in play with Trump. And used to try to tear him down entirely. But I want to get back to we can continue this if afterward. I want to get back to the where we are currently, the slide on the screen now. I mean, so he signed this executive order, and I think he's right. I think he's right. The Department of Education should be disbanded. It's not even a lot of people. There's 4,200 employees. And I think 1,400 of them were laid off. And this judge came in. That was in March, and this judge came in who was a Biden-appointed judge in Massachusetts, and was able to affect national policy from a district in Massachusetts with an injunction to halt those efforts, and was successful. Has been successful so far.
Well,
so there's a lot of things there.
So I'm not an employment lawyer, but I know there are laws, on the books and so when the government spins something up, it should get unspun by the same mechanism that spun up. So I don't know if the department, if the Department of Energy was created by an executive order by the president, then the Department of Education would be able to be dismantled by an executive order by the president. But I think that's not what we're talking about here. This is like, it comes to employment law and the process for, like, firing people. So, but there should be a, if the Department of Education exists as a cabinet because the Congress voted it that way, then Congress should vote on it. And so basically things should be spun down. And there are laws. We are a nation of laws, and there's a whole lot of laws around employment, perhaps too many. But like you still have to, just because he's well intentioned with wanting to dismantle the Department of Education. So I don't know. I'd have to read get the details on what the basis of the firings are. But yeah, if it's just around the firing.
Are you saying that the leader of the executive branch and the free world, but importantly, the leader of the executive branch doesn't have the ability to determine staffing sizes for the Department of Education or federal agencies?
I'm not I would say that, I'm not familiar, how, so if
I don't mean to put you on the spot, because I don't really know either, and I want to get to the answers, because at some point common sense has to rule the day. But at some point, and I think that this could be figured out. If it's unfortunate that we don't have the society where we would engage in national debate, where like a true debate, not like the garbage that goes on ahead of presidential elections. Like, what a joke, obviously. Especially if an absolute moron like Kamala Harris can even, be seen by anybody in the country to have a reasonable and valid anything to say. It's not a serious debate. It's staged, whatever. But a real national debate to get to the issues like we just discussed on this program.
Yeah. I think if the president wants, I think there's a legal means. If there's not, then that's a good question for us to look into is, if you wanted to get rid of the Department of Education, is there actually a legal means by which a president could do so? Like, is it the Congress doesn't like they pass a budget and there's no money in the fund in the budget for it, and then so everyone kind of goes home when if there's no money in your budget, does that mean what are they contractually obligated to with these employees?
Yeah.
So that's the question for me. Is I don't believe an executive order is the legal means by which you get rid of a department. I like being fairly ignorant on this topic, but I think that's the case. But is there a legal means? Because we all know that once a government agency gets created or a program gets started, it almost never goes away, it seems like. So, but is that because there's no means to actually legally? And if that's a much bigger problem.
So well, that becomes that's the we're already being ruled by. This is my theory about how we're already being ruled by machines. Because everybody is just checking the box, and people are bouncing around like, I don't know, I don't think we can do this. Well, if everybody agrees that we should do this, who gives a shit what the legal language says? Like, how about if a lawyer comes over and says, well, actually the document doesn't, you punch him in the face and discard him from society. He doesn't get to participate anymore because he's an idiot. Because 100% in this perfect example, it's an economical else equal example. I get it. But if 100% of the population and those affected agree that this is, the right way to go, I don't need some pencil neck judge from Massachusetts who clearly has a political agenda to halt the process. And by the way, same opinion related to Hidalgo Abrego Garcia Ramirez, who's clearly a gangbanger, was trafficking people across the country. His wife is on record commenting about how he beat her up and
repeatedly
and aggressively, and he's a bad dude, and he's got gang tattoos all over his head. We have people spending our dollars to go see him in Ecuador. What are we doing?
First of all,
that's also the effort here. What are we doing?
I think the information on that particular case, I think I've got different sources of information. And regardless of whose information you're using, like the Constitution says, and it's been upheld by over multiple cases, that people in this country, citizen or not, have the right to due process. He did not get due process, so that's why he needs to come back and have due process. And so,
what is that due process that you think he
it's
is?
like where you actually, if you're accusing somebody of something that you know, like that in a court of law or in some type of formal process, evidence is presented to show that you're a bad person, you've done these things. He's been convicted of 0 crimes. His wife issued a restraining order against him and then dropped it. That's all I know. I haven't seen any. No one he knows says that
he's here illegally, is he not?
He's here illegally. Yeah,
but that's the crime.
Yeah, but that's a crime. That's,
so you can't say he hasn't committed any crimes.
He hasn't been convicted of any crimes. I commit crimes all the time. Every time I get in my car, I probably commit a crime or 2 or several. So I'm and that's the only crimes I'm going to admit to right here.
So we need to fly him. Yeah, be careful. We need to fly him back and stand him in front of a judge, and the judge needs to say, do you have are you a citizen? And he'll say no, and then we say, okay, we're going to deport you then.
Well,
and then we send him back.
Well, I think he had been going to like the reason I'm not sure how they knew, because I think he had applied for asylum perhaps, and he had been going to his different asylum means. I don't know the exact details of what his where it was in the process, but
a political issue. Mike, I mean,
it's people. I'm 100% people, good, bad, whatever. You got to have due process. Otherwise, we're just, we're living in, some state-run authority. We're in an authoritarian state, and I don't want any part of
it. And that is already true. We already know that. And but that one's more overt. It's out in the open, and people can argue it, and they will if it satisfies their political purpose, and we see the problem, right? And I know we agree on that. We see the problem. I don't disagree with you conceptually that we need to follow the laws, but that discussion is a much bigger and broader discussion because the number of laws that are created in this country versus already existing on the books that aren't enforced. And we can look at the gun laws that aren't enforced. There's a lot of laws that aren't enforced.
Oh yeah, there's the number of laws. I would be in favor of, like, every so many years we just start over. We just have a new constitutional convention. I don't know, every 50 years, say. We have a new constitutional, and we come up with a whole new set of federal rules. And we have a new constitution. We have new federal rules. And we start over, like, and the ones we can agree, going back to my point, the ones we can have a consensus on. Okay, if we can get 2/3 agreement or whatever metric at the national level, and if we can't, no law. And then, okay, some state says, well, we can form a consensus. Great, you form a law. Some town, hey, the state can't get it. We can't get a consensus in our town. We believe this to be the case, and we want this to be the law. Great, and if I like it, I'll move. And people like, well, I don't want to move. Well, you got legs, you got a car, you got a bicycle, start walking. But I think that's a better world to live in, is where people like that. It's not, sure, it'd be great if
fair enough.
If the entire world had the laws that I wanted, that like Mike's laws rule the whole planet, but that's never going to be the case. So why don't we agree that, the number one thing I want people to agree with, my first microagreement is, you have to be okay. People have to be okay with people doing things and thinking things that you disagree with, and you got to be okay with that. As long as it doesn't affect me directly or harm me directly, that's I'm fine with that. Like, you can think, you can do stupid, you can give your kids stupid names, you can marry the wrong person, you can have a
I don't disagree, but we're that's down the road. That's more utopic in thought, I guess, or at least it's more in that direction. We have bigger fish to fry.
But I think fundamentally, though, that the problem is this idea that some side is going to somehow get the levers of power, and they're going to, enact their ideology.
But remember, I get it. I get it. That is the status. That's why the status quo can't continue. And that is the whole reason why we're here. That is the whole purpose of the 76. It's not about one side.
No, but
no, hold on a second. Hold on.
Okay.
It is the one side is big government. The one side is the Democrats and the Republicans who are interested in big government to enrich themselves and use their influence and power to gain more power and influence and to enrich themselves and their friends and so on and so forth. And they're across both parties. I think it's more weighted on one party than the other. But I think that breaking that system is the way. That's the way to achieve a more perfect union, to understand that we actually don't disagree. Yeah. You and I both think the Department of Education should be disbanded.
Yeah.
I think that most people, if they sat through, maybe not this discussion, but certainly as a starting point, but a more thorough assessment of what the Department of Education is doing and what it has done and what it's allowed. We didn't even get into the decision to, and this goes back to participation ribbons, which were our first. You and I could probably trade a lot of stories about. I remember getting a green ribbon. I was like, what the hell is this? We didn't win a single game. I don't want a ribbon. That's what I said to my dad, who was a soccer coach. He's like, well, I don't disagree, but here's your ribbon. The purple pens. There was some school district in Georgia that stopped using. The school district wouldn't let their teachers use red pens to mark answers wrong because it might make the child feel bad. Hey, guess what, educator who's underpaid and not appreciated, and you have to buy Kleenex every so often because you don't have enough school supplies. That's a motivator. Shame is not a bad thing. It's a good thing to fail somebody so that they learn from the failure and they come back stronger. And we've created, and it's evident in our global standings in terms of education, however you look at it, and the slide that's occurred over the past 50 decades and even before that. I think we were kind of top in the world back post World War II. And here we are. So those policies were terrible, and we now know that the Department of Education is a terrible department. It doesn't need to exist. It doesn't need to exist. It created Common Core math. Do you remember Common Core math? Were your kids in school when they came home with this new math? That wasn't reason enough to get rid of it all. People need to open their eyes. So I think we all agree. I really strongly believe. In my hearts that we agree on all of these issues.
I guess
not the status quo.
Yeah, but I think what will happen, so let's say tomorrow the Department of Education goes away. All the federal government has no role in education anymore. I don't see that making really a significant change in the quality of education at the schools. Like some schools that were getting federal dollars, they're going to lose services and things, and they're probably going to be worse off. But overall, over the course of it, I don't see it making a bit of difference. Sure, so get rid of it, put those responsibilities back to the states. But in terms of actually, if you want to improve education, you've got to change other things, how teachers are compensated, and cultural.
Don't forget, it's a giant convoluted mess, and it's not just education. The healthcare system is even worse. Energy policy, maybe not worse. I don't know. But it's bad. There's a lot of problems. The justice system. Do we have equal justice under the law? Obviously, we don't. We obviously do not. So it's a gigantic, convoluted mess. We have to start walking. I think the Department of Education being, abolished is a pretty good start. 93% of the funding goes down to the states. I guess. And or goes back to the states. The 7% administrative, that's what is that? That's $15 billion in administrative savings right there. So that's a victory, and we have to stack up. We have to stack up victories, and I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'd start at the Pentagon. I'd start where the majority of
the money. We're talking about the Department of Education here. Let's. I know. Department of Defense. We'll get there.
Okay, but yeah, but actually making a difference. I think schools will still mostly just be subsidized daycares for and the
I
people
disagree, man. Look at the charter schools. We need to look at the charter school, which is exactly, it's like Estonia. You have to put your Estonia thinking cap on.
Well, I do think charter
Imagine
schools,
these things.
no,
There's no reason why we have to be stuck with this bullshit status quo. It's terrible.
I know. I think I'm all in favor of charter schools. I like kids. Like if you're going to have public education, which I'm in favor of, to at least to a certain level, that you get a voucher and you want to cash that in at your local public school, great. If you want to use it at a charter school, great. If you want to use it at a religious school, I'm fine with that. As long as the individual is the one making the choice or the parent is making the choice, I don't, like in terms of the whole, what's going on in Texas, where I think they just passed a law saying 10 Commandments need to be posted in every classroom. So I'd be opposed to a state saying that they have to be, but if a teacher wanted to post them, by themselves because they thought there was some value to it as a teacher, I would be fine with an individual teacher putting it up. And then if her parents got pissed, and that's a conversation between them. I'm definitely in favor of teachers getting more flexibility to teach, because everyone learns different. You got 30 different kids. You probably got 30 different ways to teach those kids. And
I think you and I could put together a school that addresses all of that stuff. I really believe that so strongly. And I believe that these issues, and I used to have these conversations with my very liberal friends, or colleagues, they're friends, whatever. We could come up with a society, and this was really a lot of the genesis of this idea going back many, many years. We can come up with a society where the vast majority of us are good with the rules and the way that we interact with one another and what the education.
And I think most neighborhoods in most towns, how they did it long before there was a Department of Education, like people got together, our kids are kind of dumb. Why don't we put up a building and have we'll take turns, like the smart people go over and teach them some things. And that's how schools got started. Like my grandfather, he was like, he went to it was a one-room schoolhouse down in rural Louisiana up until I think the age of 16. And then after he basically, then the next year he became the teacher. That was how it worked. It's like, okay.
Well, I mean, it's a different world back then.
And he went on to eventually, be.
That's meritocracy. That's meritocracy, and I'm on board with that 100%. We've moved away from meritocracy across our entire economy, private and public sector, and that's a shame.
Yeah, and his father
from your grandfather.
Yeah, his father couldn't even sign his name. He wrote with an X. He was completely illiterate, but one room schoolhouse worked well enough for him, and they didn't have any disagreements about what books were in there and the reading, that. But in a local situation, people can agree on this is how we're going to do it, and if they don't, they can move or they can change, and that doesn't require an act of Congress to make that change. There's also
we covered a lot of ground. I think we covered a lot of ground. I think we do have agreement on a lot of these issues, and it can't be we can't be afraid to move forward and argue our conviction.
So you're going to come up with some micro agreements from this discussion?
Yeah, 100%. And I think we'll review them on the next show. So any commentary from our vast subscriber base, we're always welcome to take on those comments and discuss them on the shows. And eventually we're going to get to a live stream format and have it much more interactive. That's the goal, to have it more of an interactive community based platform, kind of again radio style, and all views are welcome and open for discussion. Let's debate. Let's bring it back.